Hi, everyone. We are super excited to have you today. Thank you for joining the webinar. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and next week you will receive an email with the recording and slides so you can share with others in your organization who may find this information useful. We encourage you to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to stay up to date in the weeks leading up to NVRD, the whole 2 weeks we have before the holiday is happening. At the end of the webinar, there will be a question and answer session. If you have questions, please ask your questions in the Q&A box. We will be monitoring both the chat and Q&A box, but the Q&A box helps us sort through what questions can get asked at the end. If you have comments or experience audio or visual issues, please put them in the chat being monitored by our staff. We're excited you could join us today, and we'll begin in just a second. Great. Again, thank you all for joining. We'll be talking about talking to voters on National Voter Registration Day, some best practices and some stories from the field with a few folks. National Voter Registration Day is coming up on Tuesday, September 28th, super close. Next slide. Before we do that though, I wanted to give a shout out to all of our sponsors who help make National Voter Registration Day happen. They make it possible by offer grants to organizations like this year's state and local captains and ensure that we can send free posters and stickers every year to folks who sign up as community partners. I should have introduced myself at the beginning. I'm Debbie Lombardi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program director for National Voter Registration Day, but I'm talking to you for just a few minutes today. On today's agenda, we'll talk about strategies from National Voter Registration Day with our first speaker, Travis, who's a part of the National Voter Registration Day team. Then we'll do stories from the field with POTR Latinx and LeadMN and some awesome people that work at both of those organizations. And we'll end with a Q&A with questions from the audience that are stories from the field, and Travis will try and answer for all of you. Before we do that, I want to share a little bit about National Voter Registration Day. National Voter Registration Day, as many of you probably know, is a nonpartisan civic holiday that's been around since 2012. And for 2021, we have big goals. We're hoping to register hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even up to 250,000 people to vote on September 28th. Engage over thousands of community partners like you. We have over 2,600 partners signed up already this year, which we're super excited about. This work couldn't be done without each of you. And help people get ready for their local and state elections that are happening across the country this year. In fact, there's some elections that are happening today. Thank you for those of you in those areas that are joining us. And get vote ready in general, because midterms are right around the corner. Over the years, National Voter Registration Day has made an impact. Since 2012, National Voter Registration Day has helped register 4.5 million people to vote for the first time or to update their registration. This is a huge number, and next year we'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary, and excited to think about how many people we can engage during that time. So now we're going to switch over to the main content of the webinar that you all signed up for, talking to voters with our first speaker. Next slide. Travis Marin from Nonprofit Vote, who is our communications coordinator with an emphasis in National Voter Registration Day. Thanks for joining today, Travis.
Awesome. Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, hi, everybody. As Debbie mentioned, my name is Travis. I work with Nonprofit Vote. Specifically, I focus a lot on National Voter Registration Day. The emails and social media posts you guys see, that's me working with a team of some dedicated, quirky, entertaining folks to really give this voice of this holiday a voice that feels real and feels entertaining and feels engaging. So before we begin, I want to remind everybody that this is going to be sent out to everybody who RSVP'd via email. You'll get these slides and a recording. So no worries if you have to leave early, or if you miss something, you can access this anytime you want once we're all done. So that's good. Let's begin. Next slide. All right. So in terms of messaging, so this is kind of a wraparound principle for all strategies, whether it's digital, social, personal interactions, etc. You know, we've done some research over the past year to kind of figure out the best ways to engage people around voting and getting out to vote. And we've sort of broken it down into kind of four buckets, four main themes. One is identity. And, you know, are you a voter? Become a voter. I am a voter. You know, identifying as somebody who is taking part in the process. Issues, things that get people interested and engaged in civic activism, the civic process that leads to the act of registering to vote and taking part in it in a more democratic way. You know, that could be Black Lives Matter, police reform, healthcare, perhaps climate change, given some of the extreme weather we're seeing lately. Third bucket is empowerment. So making folks feel that, you know, that their vote is more than just a vote, more than just a trip to the polls. It actually changes things and has the power to make a change. And then fourth is kind of just process nuts and bolts oriented. You know, how to vote, when to vote, deadlines, methods of voting. You know, because it all varies by state by state. Next slide, please. So the research we've done kind of points to a few key takeaways that you can implement into your communications. And again, that's kind of across the board. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong slide. The biggest, and it's just that felt personal and conversational and timely, we noticed had the biggest impact. You know, so that makes sense. Voters respond to messages delivered by personal contacts, people they know, people who are trusted voices. And we see that kind of playing out in the voting sphere, in the COVID sphere. People tend to listen to information from a source they trust, from a loved one, from a friend who is seen as kind of a community and known voice. When it comes to mass emails, the research we've done kind of seems to show that they're not super effective. In some ways, they actually show zero impact. And this is just from an organizational standpoint, getting folks engaged and out to vote. It's not to say mass emails aren't helpful for, say, signing on partners for National Voter Registration Day, which is what we do. We see lots of success with emails. But from a organization to person level, there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect. And again, trusted messengers are key. People who can demonstrate that they care about, you know, why you should vote and care about why you should be involved in the process. It makes it seem more legitimate, and you know, it gives the voter less reason to feel suspicious about some partisan motive or some ulterior motive. Next slide, please. This may contradict a bit, and it does contradict a bit with the previous slide that kind of encouraged more personal, kind of timely engagement, but we also found that people tend to respond better to information that feels official and feels governmental. You know, the kind of boring nuts and bolts, you know, eat your vegetables, this is how you vote, this is why you vote, and these are the exact steps and how you do it. You know, things that give 1 to 3 easy steps about important info and things to know. But that's not to say it can't go hand in hand with the sort of more conversational, more personable interactions that we also that tend to work in outreach to voters. I think the key is finding a happy medium between both, because you need to have kind of entertainment and engagement and trusted personality to keep people listening and give them a reason to pay attention in the first place. But also it needs to seem legitimate and needs to seem governmental and just, you know, what are we very to the facts. Also, adverse political ads are less effective in motivating people to engage in the electorate. And along the same lines, nonpartisan messaging works better than partisan messaging. And that makes sense too, given everything we've kind of lived through over the past couple of years. Things that feel too vitriolic, that feel too partisan, can almost immediately shut off a part of the brain that makes you want to keep listening. Especially if a voter is already kind of engaged in one side or the other, it may make them stop listening to whatever it is you have to say. So we have to walk that line between nonpartisan, but also inspire a sense of urgency and inspire a sense that what we're talking about is very important to the civic health that we all take part in and we all profit from. Next slide, please. So 2021, you know, what we've noticed in conversations about, you know, things we discussed a lot in 2020, about fraud, about voter suppression, leading off with those things doesn't seem to produce anything positive. Instead, we encourage leading with, you know, positive shared values versus combating disinformation. Things like freedom, emphasizing the freedom to vote. Voices, ensuring every voice is heard. And inclusive democracy. For democracy to work, all of us must include all of us. So closing gaps that exist with registration. You know, heading out on a mission to combat from, you know, disinformation about fraud and suppression can feel good in the moment. It can feel as if we're contributing and we're fighting back against, you know, negative actors. But you know, our research has shown that what that does is, one, it sort of introduces the negative out there already. It kind of promotes a dialogue. It gives a chance for somebody to jump in and argue with your point. And you know, fact checking and kind of debunking should be left to the debunkers and fact checkers. What we should focus on in order to promote engagement and kind of healthy democracy work is these positives: freedom, voices, inclusive democracy. That's where our bread and butter is. You know, position voters as protagonists who can work together to bring positive change. For example, creating a system for easy access to voting versus fighting a harm, fixing our broken system. So always lean toward what can be done, what we should be doing, versus creating an enemy, as good as it might feel. Next slide, please. So again, instead of fighting misinformation, move toward the positive. Avoid kind of the red versus blue oppositional frame of fraud versus security, and instead just pivot to freedom and focus instead on that. You know, don't repeat claims or even refute, you know, there is no voter fraud. That only keeps the talking point alive. You know, it's like I said, you know, don't think about apples. What are you thinking about in that moment? Probably apples. So we try to focus on the message we want to create. If you don't like the dialogue, change it. And additionally, humanize the electoral process as the product of people and efforts instead of politicians. You know, focus on local election officials, focus on poll workers who are volunteering to help because they believe in it. The folks who actually make our democracy work, as opposed to the folks who, you know, attempt to bend it to their political needs at the moment. Next slide, please. In 2021, we're focusing a lot on local issues. You know, given the hyper-local focus of public health, school curriculum, police accountability, things that we've been talking about a lot in the last 2 years. You know, we sort of have more, while folks can feel a bit of a burnout in 2021, that's understandable. The fact that we're talking so much about things that begin and end at local level elections and local level politics gives us a bit of an edge. You know, voters have become increasingly focused on the impact of local and state elected officials, focus on the fact that the elected police chief, the mayor, the town manager plays a bigger role in your life than the president. You know, you're going to experience a direct impact more of, you know, the town council changing the assessing rate of town properties than you are of the president tweeting that day. It's just basic common civic reality at this point. Reiterate that elections are run, staffed, and executed by people in neighborhoods. It's your friend and neighbor who is volunteering at the polls. It's somebody you know through maybe 3 or 4 connections who works in the town clerk's office, who is helping to make the election happen. And kind of like just leaning to the local. Be vocal, vote close to home. The best thing that I've seen about the importance of local elections is that in the movie Jaws 2, it's the same mayor from Jaws 1, who, as you may recall from Jaws 1, was not a very good mayor. So the importance of being engaged and paying attention to what's happening at the local level just cannot be overstated. Next slide, please. And there are, of course, generational differences in how we message to folks, and that makes tons of sense. You know, based on 2020 research, we found that social pressure messaging, you know, not kind of making people feel bad for not being involved, but something that's a little humorous, a little more ribbing, is effective across all generations. For folks who are part of the baby boomer generation and Gen X, identity messaging, you know, things that identify, you know, I am a voter, you are a part of the process, tends to be most impactful. Inversely, for millennials and Gen Z, empowerment messaging, you know, you play a role, you can change this, you are a vital part in your democracy, is most impactful. We've also found that Gen Z is more likely to encourage others to vote and share political views, which you know, makes a lot of sense. It's a generation that's been wired in on devices since the jump. So they have perhaps the best fluency when it comes to encouraging others in their system, in their kind of social circle, to take part in the process. Also, celebrity voices can boost Gen Z turnout, but have little or no effect on other age groups, which surprised me when I saw it. But I guess when you think about it, you know, maybe Gen Z feels closer with celebrities because they've always had access via various social platforms. That's my theory, but we'll see. Next slide, please. And lastly, here's, we have a slate of communications tools for you to make use of during this cycle. Our communications toolkit through National Voter Registration Day is full of, a sample press release, a sample media advisory, and dates to use for when you should put those out. They're basically Mad Libs for contacting the press. You fill in your event, the date, a quote from your director, and you can just send it out to your local newspaper, your local radio station, and help gin up some support for your event, whatever form that takes. Similarly, we have a field organizing toolkit, which is helpful in kind of teaching your volunteers how best to engage with voters, whether that's virtual or in an in-person setting. We have a whole library full of sample social media posts that we've been working on throughout the year, things that range from, simple countdowns to, National Voter Registration Day is this many days away, to reminders that if you've moved recently, if you've changed your name, you have to update your registration, to even some kind of quirkier memes that you can make full use of. So we'll drop those links in the chat. All those posts are also available on a shareable content Google Drive, whatever one you find to be most easy to use. We have a voter registration script that kind of lays out some of the more common responses and frequently asked questions from engaging with voters face to face about if they're registered, why aren't you registered, how can I help you register, to kind of better prepare your volunteers for what to expect on the day of. And then lastly, we have an NVRD presentation slide deck, which just kind of explains the holiday in presentation form for those who might need a bit of an explanation or a refresher. So that's everything I've got to offer you today. So I'm going to kick it over to Fatu.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Travis. We're gonna switch over to our stories from the field with our first guest speaker, Fatu. As a survivor of civil conflict, next slide. As a survivor of civil conflict, Fatu has dedicated her life to addressing issues that are at the root of social conflict and instability. She is passionate about addressing poverty and the different ways it impacts our local and global societies. Fatu has addressed this by advocating for people and their right to support in their time of need and working with underserved communities to create a proactive environment where everyone has a role in building their communities and narrative. As an organizer, Fatu started a grassroots movement through the vision of getting African immigrants more civically involved and serving their communities. Fatu holds a master's degree in international relations and affairs and a bachelor's degree in human resource management with a minor in marketing from Southwest Minnesota State University. In her current role, Fatu continues her work to advance change through civically engaging college students and helping build the next leaders in the state and country through relationships and meaningful collaboration. She's here today as the Outreach Director for LeadMN. Welcome, Fatu. We're excited to hear more about your work.
Thank you all for having me. So I am Outreach Director at LeadMN. My pronouns are she or hers. So LeadMN is an organization that represents all two-year college students in the state of Minnesota. So roughly about 160 to 180,000 students, which is a lot. So one of the things that we do is try to break barriers, and we do that in different ways. We try to empower students to be really effective leaders in their communities, but also on their campuses. And part of that is what guide that work, I should say, is our sort of 4 leading pillars. So we provide training and support for students through our conferences that we have throughout the year. We also empower our student leaders by giving them really hands-on experiences through serving with LeadMN, but also serving on different committees within the state of Minnesota. And we also want to make sure they're successful, so we're providing them resources, usually through our scholarship program that we have here within our organization through our amazing partnership with our funders. And then also we inspire them to seek change on their campuses, but also within their communities. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we actually try and do that then is through our Growing Voter Project. And this is our vision to really prioritize our civic engagement work. And this is a year-round effort that we do. We try to make sure voting is a habit for students. And so we are very hands-on in a way that we engage with our student population. We also try and center groups that are historically have been disenfranchised, and we try to be very intentional in our approach. We're building this really amazing partnership with all the different Black student unions, association, and campuses to make sure we're creating a pipeline for the next student leaders who may not be in tune with student government on campus and may not want to participate in that. So we're trying to figure out ways to make sure they are also being engaged in the work that we're doing. And one of the key things to a part of this vision that we have in our civic engagement work is to build really impactful relationships. And so we have been working very strongly with our local campuses to make sure we're, again, prioritizing student of color, but also young voters. And so the different ways we do that is to have a more ongoing approach in our education. I'll talk more about this in our strategies that we use. We try to be very intentional in having multiple ways students are learning about elections, they're learning about voting, why it's important, ways that they could be involved, and we're making sure we're partnering with institutions that can actually help make that more accessible to everyone. Next slide, please. Next, oh, sorry. Okay, some of the strategies that we actually use then that have been really successful for us is to, again, build relationship with student leaders. So we've been working over the years with our student government on campus. Obviously, not all students are going to opt into that structure of a leadership. So we try different methods to build with different clubs on campuses. We try to be in person and engage them in that way, but very intentional in building a relationship with student leadership on campus, and also with the faculties that are have that shared ambition and goal of engaging students around civic engagement. We also then try and meet students where they're at. It sounds very simple, but we make it our goal to be on campus as much as we can, especially now that we're all back on campus or in-person classes. And one of the ways we've been doing that is have like several blitz throughout the year. As part of this vision of having an ongoing, voter engagement process for students, we make sure we're doing voter registration 2-3 times a year through a blitz format. And so the goal really is to allow students to understand that there is an election happening every year. It may not seem that way, but there always is an election every year, and how they can actually learn about those different different elections that are happening within their communities. And so when we're on campus, we're having meaningful one-on-one conversations, ways that they can be involved, and plugging them into the ways that they can be involved that very much align with what they're interested in doing. Another ways that we actually meet students where they're at too then is through class wraps. What that means is just short presentations that we do in class. This year, we're going to be doing a hybrid setup where we'll be actually in person and also online. And this is the opportunity for us to just ask students, why are you registered to vote? Why do you think it's important to vote? And are you aware there's a local election happening? And so get them involved in a conversation, and then we register them right in class. So last year, we started this whole push to provide online tools for that. And so then we'll provide the online link for folks to register to vote. And one of the tools that we have utilized last year and some years now has been our online election tool. And what that is in an amazing partnership with the Secretary of State office here in Minnesota and Rock the Vote, we're able to create an online platform where students can go and learn more about the local races that are happening within their city or state, platform issues that candidates are running on, how to vote early, what are they going to actually need to turn in an absentee ballot. We also host online candidate forums that they can actually be a part of. So we house all this in this election center to make sure voting is very accessible and is a process where it doesn't seem so complicated. It sort of demystify what that looks like. And so this has been a really effective method that have really increased our, not voter registration, but just the participation of our student base. So that's something that's been very successful for us. We also utilize text banking and phone banking we actually start with engaging folks with a text bank before we actually engage with phone banking, because our demographic respond quicker to text messaging. So our text messaging is usually to, again, remind folks to vote, provide information and resources that they're going to need if there's an election. So for example, this year we have about 3 or 4 different local elections. So Minneapolis have a mayoral race. So then we're then texting just those students who are in that area about the elections, and also providing them information around ranked choice voting, what that is, what the process looks like. We also partner with our local League of Women Voters to provide candidate forum for them. So there are different ways we're trying to get them where they're at, but also make sure the information we're sharing is very, very up to date and is meaningful and impactful for them. And then finally, one of the things that we definitely try and do, again, like I mentioned, is this sort of on the year-round voter engagement work that we do. We do believe that elections happen every year, and we do believe that in order to get folks in, sort of change the narrative of like national elections being important, is to really engage folks in their local races. So my work has been trying to like revamp that and just continue in that momentum of getting folks more enthused and informed about what's happening in their communities, and making sure they're utilizing their voice to make change within those spaces as well. And then finally, as Travis mentioned, social media is so important. One of the things that we learned in 2020 is how much we need to do to like uplift that space. And so we've been trying to really revamp what that will look like for us. But it's been very interesting seeing the TikTok videos that we're posting being really successful. We have lined up voter education week tools that we're going to share with folks. As we're visiting campuses, we're posting that we're visiting, and we're going to be visiting and talking to other campuses too then about NVRD and registering to vote, having sort of a Q&A online as well. So it's been a very informed space. And so those are the strategies that we're using, has been very helpful for us so far. But I look forward to answering any questions you all have at the end of this. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Fatu. And also if you have questions, don't forget to drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them after our next speaker, Juliana, who I'm excited to introduce. Juliana was born in Venezuela and raised in Central Florida. From 2012 through 2015, she conducted policy research and provided programmatic support to the U.S. Departments of Labor, Education, and Health and Human Services. In 2016, she joined the Bernie Sanders campaign, focusing on outreach to the Latinx communities in Florida and Nevada, and subsequently served as the Puerto Rico field director. Juliana went on to co-create and run the endorsement department at Senator Sanders' legacy organization, Our Revolution. From 2018 to 2019, Juliana worked for a Florida state house race and joined New Consensus, a startup nonprofit devoted to actualizing the Green New Deal. Last year, she coordinated voter registration programs with the Florida Civic Engagement Table. Juliana has a BA in social sciences with a concentration in politics and a minor in rhetoric from Utrecht University. Apologies if I pronounced the name of that university incorrectly. Juliana, we're excited to have you today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm super excited to be here today with all of you. We could go to the next slide, please. So Poder Latinx is a relatively new nonprofit. It was founded on the summer of 2019, but although it's a new nonprofit, we have a lot of very talented and experienced staff that have had decades of experience in the civic engagement / social justice space that came on to join this organization. And I'm incredibly proud because within that short period of time, we were able to register over 40,000 people to vote. Our mission is to build a political wave where Latinx folks are decision makers of our democracy and play a vital role in the transformation of our country. One of the reasons that the co-founders of Poder Latinx decided to start the organization was because in their respective nonprofits, they noticed that elected officials would treat our communities as checkboxes. So whenever there was an election coming up, they would meet with us, check off the box and ask for our votes, but never really deliver on anything. So we really view voter registration as a tactic, and I'll get into that later. We also we made 1.5 million phone calls and sent almost 5 million text messages last year, and that was the part of the following up with folks, because it's not just about registering people, right? If you register people and they don't show up to the booth, it's not for nothing, but we really want to make sure that these folks actually vote. And this year, it's been a challenge with the pandemic. We were mostly remote throughout the year, and COVID cases started to decrease in Central Florida, where we mainly operate. So we decided to go back out into the field for about 2 or 3 weeks. But we quickly had to shut back down operations again and turn them into remote, because all the hospitals in Central Florida have gone into code black, and the spikes were just off the charts. So we wanted to make sure that we were keeping ourselves and our community safe. So we flipped to a remote program, and just this month we were able to make 129,000 phone calls and have at least 1,500 like deep conversations with those individuals around voter registration. Next slide, please. So, right, so we do a lot of GOTV, right? Get out the vote. We last year ran a program about vote by mail, a vote by mail chase program, calling folks, letting them know, when their ballot was available, when they had to turn them in, where were the drop-off boxes. This year we had a couple municipal elections. We are mainly operating in the Central Florida region. So in the spring, we did some calls for the municipal races, letting folks know that these are coming up, because a lot of people just don't even know when these races are occurring. And we're also going to be participating in the upcoming November municipal elections in Orlando, which is where I'm based. But aside from civic engagement, right, we do the civic engagement work, we do the voter registration, we do, regular events educating our community about the importance of voting, why it's important to vote, what each elected position is responsible for, because a lot of people don't really know that the more local the elected position, the more power they have over your day-to-day life. But aside from that, we also do issue-based organizing around climate, economic, and immigrant justice. And for us, we view this in a very holistic way, right? Because voting, as important as it is, and it is incredibly important, I think we can all agree on that, it's just a tactic for moving forward and advancing the issues that affect our community and to create a more equitable world. Next slide, please. So for instance, we work a lot with undocumented people, and undocumented folks can't vote. A lot of people can't vote, right? And this, like I mentioned earlier, is incredibly important, but it's just a tactic. It's just a piece of the puzzle. And there's dozens of other pieces of the puzzle when it comes to what we ultimately want to accomplish, and that is creating a world where our communities are safe, where they have their needs met, where they feel empowered, where they feel like their voices matter. So for us, it's not just about registering people, but it's also about ensuring that our elected officials are progressive and accountable to us. And that's sort of the biggest piece, right, is accountability. How can you hold elected officials accountable? So for us, that's when it comes to organizing, right? We, around the clock, around the year, we engage our community, we engage the people that have signed up with our organization on specific campaigns that we craft with them to move the issues forward. Next slide, please. Right, so that's our holistic approach. But I also want to talk to you all a little bit about the field, right? Because that's what we're here to learn more about, is how do we do this work on the field and remotely. While we were on the field, and even with your remote program, it's really important to hire canvassers that are a part of the community that you're trying to reach. So we are trying to reach the Latinx community, working class Latinx folks. those are the people that we hire. So obviously, you know, if you're trying to reach college students, you're going to want to like have volunteers or paid canvassers that are college students, and, you know, adjust that to the demographic that you're trying to target. And even if you're not in a constituency-based organization, hire people that are like very motivated, that care a lot about this work. And if they don't, it's actually an incredible opportunity for leadership development. You could be hiring somebody from within the community. And what happens a lot, the truth of the matter is we do paid canvassing programs. People need jobs, right? So a lot of people will come in not necessarily having that civic minded mentality, but through a series of trainings, you know, we let folks know what we are about, and we train them on why voter registration is so important. And they end up coming out of that training as, you know, leaders in voter registration, as like new, you know, advocates for voter registration in their communities. So hire from within your community, go to where your community is, obviously, right? You think that's so common sense, but often it isn't, because there's a lot of places that you just don't think about, right? So for us, it was like, who are we trying to target? Where are they, right? And we knew we had to be in bus stops, we had to be in Latino supermarkets, we had to go to colleges and also technical schools. We had to go to health clinics. We mainly, when it comes to the field, we mainly do site-based voter registration as opposed to door knocking. So, you know, we were very thoughtful about the sites that we were going into, and connected to that is building a relationship with the owners of those spaces. So there's a lot of Latino grocery stores here in Central Florida, and, you know, we have to talk to the managers of those stores and say, hey, by the way, look, we're a, you know, nonpartisan nonprofit. We're doing voter registration work. Is it all right if we're here in these spaces? And a lot of the times they're not going to be okay with that, and, you know, you're going to have to respect that. But more often than not, they are, right. They're receptive. But even if they are, it happens sometimes where your canvassers are going to get kicked out of those locations. So you have to be very nimble. You have to adapt. If you're in a location and you're just not, you're not getting the registrations that you need there, it's okay to move to another spot, right? Also, when it comes to the way that you're engaging voters, there has to be a high level of energy, right? You can't approach someone and say, hey, you want to register to vote? No, you know, you have to be like, hey, do you want to register to vote? And be prepared to be rebuffed, right? Be prepared to told no. And you have to really adapt and pivot. And that's why, you know, even when you're doing like remote voter registration on the phones or text messaging, next slide, please. Whenever you get a no, think about how you can build to a yes, right? So like something we often do is like, we talk to someone and they say, hey, I'm registered to vote. And then, you know, you ask, have you recently moved, right? Because at least here in Florida, if you've moved, your voter registration changes. Or we ask, well, do you have a friend or a family member that needs help registering? And we do find people that way. Another thing that I believe Travis alluded to a little bit earlier is really keeping that language nonpartisan. It works for many reasons. One, most voter registration work tends to be C3, so you cannot, under any circumstance, bring in certain politicians or political parties. The language has to be very, very neutral. It really is just about registering folks and helping people exercise that right to vote and make their political voice heard. But it also works in gaining trust, because, you know, we always tell people we register people no matter what party affiliation. Like, we are just here to make sure that our community is being registered. Be prepared for things like, I don't have time, either on the phone or in person. And when you hear that, a good way to come back is to say, hey, you know what, this actually takes like 2 minutes. If you're on the phone, like, I can walk you through it. Or if you have a form, like, you can say, hey, look, this form takes you 2 minutes, very quick. And be persistent, right? Unless, you know, you get to feel it out. And I think it's easier when you're doing it in person. You can feel when somebody is just like does not want any kind of interaction or engagement. And then, you know, you can make the decision to back off. But most of the time, if you have like the right energy, so much about this work is about that energy, and it also translates over the phone. And when somebody tells you I'm not interested in voting, our response is always like, okay, we understand. We just want you to know that this is the most direct way that you can make your voice heard. And remember, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that sometimes gets people like, hey, wait a second. So those are just some of the things in terms of messaging that have worked for us. I saw in the comment from Alice about, the concern around making sure people aren't being turned away at the polls. And that's something that we have also thought a lot about, because our community does tend to be disenfranchised in that way. And I think that's why building out like election protection programs are really important. Something that we did last year is we trained volunteer poll monitor poll workers who were there observing and seeing what was happening. And like, there were times where people were, very few times actually, where they were kicked out or not allowed to vote. And they would be there providing assistance to the person in English and Spanish, letting them know what the next recourse was. Like, okay, actually you can do this. Oh, actually you have to go to this different polling location. Do you need help getting there? Or, I think having that backup election protection program along with a voter registration program is really important. I see from Jan, can someone answer who uses telephone calls, briefly talk about how you access those phone numbers you use? Okay, so when we do voter registration via phone banking, when we're doing it ourselves, we do it through like Google Voice. We just create Google Voice numbers and we have our canvassers use those so that they're not giving out their personal phone numbers. But sometimes we do have funded programs where the funder will provide Trulio numbers that are used when we're making those calls. Another thing, there are certain tools that you can use for phone banking. Something that we're using right now is a tool called Through Text. And it helps you make an impressive amount of calls. So you can make an average of about 300 calls an hour per organizer. So it's pretty impressive. It has some bugs and you do have to pay for it, but it's really helped us. I think at one of my first slides, I mentioned that we had called like over 150,000 people this month with 5 canvassers. So it's impressive.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juliana. So with these last few minutes, we're going to take some of your questions you guys have in the Q&A box. Fatu, could you join us again? Because I know people are going to have some questions for both our panelists. Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's go with, see here. So the question from Annie. Annie says, how do you collect phone numbers from text banking? Are there any disclaimers about text messaging fees necessary when collecting numbers? And feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Is that question for me or?
It's for the panel. So if either of you feel like you want to jump on that, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I can go first. So typically how we have students contact to text is through our events and conferences, and then it's more of an opt-in opportunity when they're signing up. So there isn't a fee attached to that necessarily. We do use True Text as well from our end, and that's a tool that we actually utilize to then text the students. But it's usually a consent-based because they are giving us their contact, and we sort of updated them beforehand that we will be reaching out to you talk to you more about whatever questions you had, something like that. I hope I answer your question.
I think for us, if I'm understanding the question correct, is like, where do we get phone numbers to contact folks for voter registration? Is that correct?
Yeah, that seems to be what they're, yeah.
Okay, so for us, we do it through several ways. One of them is we use something called the VAN, and I forget what that stands for, but I'm sure a lot of people are familiar. Yeah, Voter Action Network. And we do phone banking that way. We also have purchased lists in the past of potential people that are unregistered. And then we've also kind of dabbled in having like our canvassers and our staff like give us the contact information of like their friends, their loved ones, and like they themselves, I think Travis was mentioning this, like relational organizing, having them reach out to their networks and asking if anybody is unregistered and doing it that way.
Awesome. There was a question earlier from I want to say, was it Tracy, that was, what should our goals be? And Tracy, if you could put in the comments in the chat, like what you meant more specifically, I'd like to bring that question to our panelists. But I've got another question here from Rebecca. So Rebecca, how do you talk to someone who says their vote doesn't matter and refuse to register to vote? Due to electoral college, politicians don't represent them. Politicians are corrupt. But I guess at the core of the question is one we all struggle with is how do you get folks to register to vote who think their vote doesn't matter?
The tactic that we've used is like to very much affirm that reality, right? Like to say like, you know what, we hear you. And like, I have felt, and be sincere, right? Like, and I have felt that way before. I was like, I used to feel that way. And sometimes I do still feel that way. And because of that, I invested a lot of my, and tell them your story. Like, if you have a personal story as to like why this work is important to you, share that story, because that's going to be the thing that's going to help that person make that jump. And if after sharing that story, it doesn't work, then you just kind of have to accept that it is what it is. But we have found that once you get vulnerable with people, it's like the most effective way to actually change their mind.
Yeah, and I will add to that too, that what I have tried to do is focus on the local elections and the impact they have on folks. So I oftentimes when I hear people say that, usually in relation to sort of national races. So I try to pivot to what the local races and the impact it may have on their lives directly.
It's often a good strategy, I think. Let's see, another good question I think I saw a little earlier. Oh, how do you feel you best get young people to feel confident in doing outreach or talking to voters? It's from an anonymous attendee. Again, either you can jump on that. How do you best get young people to feel confident in doing this work? Because it is difficult. Any takers?
I mean, that's a good question. Our main demographic isn't like specifically younger folks, but I think that young people like really respond well to transparency. And when we did programs with colleges, we would basically go in there and say like, hey, what are the things that are like upsetting you in this world? And oftentimes young people have a lot of opinions about the ills of the world, and they're very passionate. And then after hearing them out with them, you do some sort of power mapping that shows like, how is it that an elected office can help ameliorate this social ill that they feel so passionate about? And once you start to make those connections with them, I've seen that that's sort of how they feel more like they have to understand the why, and they have to create their own why.
I like that. Let's see here. Another anonymous attendee question here. How are you engaging volunteers, organizers while remaining virtual? As in keeping people excited, especially after over a year of being virtual, and the fatigue of it all? That's a great question that we're all struggling with. Either of you want to tackle that one?
That is such a great question. And like Travis mentioned, we are 100% struggling with that. We do try to have like these exciting virtual events where we'll have like for Latinx Heritage Month. We're going to have like musicians come on our webinar, and sometimes we try to have like entertainment, also come on, actors, like involving the arts in some way, trying to keep it creative and do things that are a little bit outside the box. But the malaise is real. And I think that if you are living in a place where it's like safe enough and you're able to implement like proper COVID protocols and you feel comfortable, I think there's nothing like a physical space. But I would say in terms of like virtual, just be creative and try something new, even if it fails, right? Because it's better to try something new than just keep doing the same stuff over and over again.
Awesome, I agree. I would add to that on National Voter Registration Day, on our website, we have put together a kind of a tool kind of keeping your event COVID safe if you do choose to have an in-person one. So I'd stress that to folks. And we also do have some stuff on there about good virtual events. And we know there's it's a virtual fatigue right now for everybody, but we think there are ways to surmount that. Let's see here. Actually, I had a question for both of you relating to maybe kind of an interesting story or a good success you guys have had in the field. What's an example of a really successful voter engagement event you both did, and why do you think made it successful?
Well, for us this year, whenever you go to an actual event that's already being put on, like this is kind of like, killing two birds with one stone. So we found out that some of our partners were having like a health fair. And, there was going to be like hundreds of people at this event. They invited us to attend the event. And we were like, why don't we just send our canvassers as well? So our canvassers went out and they were able to register like hundreds of people at this event. It was like so unexpected. And a story that came out of that was that they talked to somebody who had been a US citizen. He was, I think he was Colombian. I'm not sure where his background was, but he became a citizen like 20 years ago and he had never registered to vote. And at first he was very like kind of reticent. He didn't really want to vote. He didn't believe in voting, but we had a canvasser who was Colombian and she was also like very like charismatic. I'm telling you, if you can hire like, the older, like we call them like las tías, like the aunts, they are just some of the most charismatic people and they will like break down any barrier. And she was just, she just connected with him and they were able to get him to register to vote. And they were very, very excited about it.
I grew up next to a Puerto Rican family who had a tia who sounded a lot like that. So I can understand that energy just hearing you describe it. Great. Well, I think that's a lot of the questions we have. Oh, actually, no. So Tracy, who asked her question before, didn't really get added some more context. So in terms of goals we should be setting, she says, setting goals for an organization, putting it out in social media to members so we all know what you are shooting for to create momentum ahead of time. So it seems like what you're asking, Tracy, and you can comment in the box if I'm incorrect, is what kind of goals should organizations be setting in terms of social media and explaining kind of the sort of event you're planning to hold and the momentum. I guess I can tackle that one just by virtue of my role. I think in light of the last 2 years, there's nothing wrong with kind of tampering your goals based on what we're all experiencing, especially right now where I think so many people feel a sense of just kind of civic fatigue. We've all been through a very exhaustive year and a half, going on 2 years. And every organization, no matter what level, who works in the civic space is having to work harder to get the same amount of momentum we were getting prior to this. So in terms of what you should do as somebody who's trying to get this work done, I would recommend stay excited, stay active, stay engaged. But keep trumpeting this as if it is the most important thing in the world, because it is. And keep the energy up and keep a sense of I don't want to say peril, but a sense of urgency, because this work is urgent, and we know it. We know that electing local officials, as Juliana said, is going to impact us far more than the state level kind of national politics, which of course is very important. But the local stuff, I think we've all seen in the past 2 years, has a direct, tangible impact on our neighbors' lives and our friends' lives and our communities' lives. So that's what I would suggest. So we're kind of winding down now. We have some more questions. We can't get to them all. I'm so sorry. But we do want to hit a couple things. Yes, you're welcome, Donna. We do want to hit a couple things before we wrap up. So, we are officially, as of today, 2 weeks out from National Voter Registration Day. It's very exciting. So if you want to get involved, or ask a question, or kind of reach out and kind of get some more information from us, I saw some folks were asking in the chat if they could connect. The best way to do that is to reach out to us via email at info@nationalvoterregistrationday.org. That's all one word. Again, that's info@nationalvoterregistrationday.org. So this way, if you have any questions or concerns, or kind of you have if you need some more, whatever it is, we'll see if we can't help you with it. Next slide, please. Also coming up on September 16th or September 22nd, we're going to be having some office hours. So that's if you have kind of specific things you'd like to talk about that are perhaps bigger than one email or one question, you can make a reservation through Calendly. That's a web app, Calendly, CALENDY, for a time slot. And myself and Debbie and Caitlin, our kind of counterpart with Nonprofit Vote, will hop on and see if we can help you work through it and get you ready for the big day. So if you have questions and kind of bigger items to talk about, I encourage you to take use of that. We'd love to chat with you and kind of get to know you a bit more. Next slide, please. Also, we have an events. So we have an interactive events toolkit, events map on our website, which allows you to GPS place your event on the map. And this is useful for a lot of things. One, it helps you promote your event. Two, it kind of helps you if you're looking to recruit volunteers. Folks can find events that are close by them by searching their zip code. So if you need help kind of on the field or virtually on the day of, that will be a great way to help you kind of find some people interested. Additionally, it helps us kind of get a sense of what's going on out there. You know, we run very much by kind of data and information in the field, so we can get a sense of what parts of the country where things are happening, where we can support folks more. So if you're having an event, even if it's virtual, even if it's going to be in the digital space, please, we encourage you to plot it on that map so we can get a full, vivid, colorful picture of everything that's going to be happening on that day. We need you in your insight to kind of help us along. And I think that's the last slide. Next slide, please. Yep, so that's it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled that you're all part of our team, and you know we're looking forward to the big day in 2 weeks. And again, if you have questions, please email us at info@nationalvoterregistrationday.org. And as a final reminder, yes, everybody who RSVP'd to this will get an email with the full recording of the slideshow, as well as links to the individual slides themselves. So I want to thank our two guests. Thank you so much, Fatu. Thank you so much, Juliana, for joining us. We know everybody is busy right now, just trying to lift that boulder up the hill of civic activism post 2020. And so thank you for setting aside some time to make that happen for us.
Thank you, Travis. It was a pleasure and an honor being with y'all. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm more than happy to help. My email address is gdelaro@bulletlatinx.org, and I dropped it in the chat.
Fatu, you're muted there, but I think you were saying goodbye.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Likewise, I echo that. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you for Kimberly behind the scenes, and we will see you guys on the big day, September 28th.